We're going to look at, say, the mass migration through the lens of human resources and whether or not we can reappraise the distinction of advanced economies and emerging economies in reference to the credit instrument that you're given as. And through doing this, we'll get a better perspective to what is at play when we could say migration gets weaponized to the exclusion of the voices within the West, primarily being advanced economies, and so enable us to read what is ultimately at play with this development. Usually when we're looking at advanced economies, a way of understanding this is in reference to GDP per capita, industrial capacity, technological development, infrastructure. If that's our frame of reference, then ultimately there is an issue that we need to address when we presuppose that advanced economies are advanced in producing goods and services. Because we could say that if the economy produces the principal product, the demand center that you're given as, so you're given as a credit instrument, then they are the ones that are the most advanced at producing the fully functional credit instrument that people are given as. And this reveals the logic of mass migration in a completely different way. So in that way, we can review it as a project to dilute the potential for change within Western civilization, precisely because of the spiritual poverty of the worldview is becoming increasingly hard to sell. So that would be the liberal paradigm. So we need to really redefine advanced as just being the perfection of the credit instrument that you're given as. So in this way, we can view emerging economies as nothing but, they're not poor in resources, but it's just where the population has not yet been fully transformed into the standardized, predictable consumer or the form of life that's sold. So the marginal self, the way how people have to invest in the self to disregard the totalizing claim of a buyer's journey or the production process of the credit instrument, is not yet fully developed. They're still investing in the consumer vehicle. And so people's identity are still, they might retain some connection to what is their traditional culture. And so they are tied to the question of land, non-transactional community bonds. And so from the perspective, obviously, of globalism or this false universalist claim, they are underdeveloped, obviously, because they haven't been turned into what is quantifiable and essentially an asset to be utilised. And so we could say that the growth potential is in the asset of the consumer or the demand centre. Advanced economies are not ones that produce all these goods and services. We could say maybe we take that for granted, but that's always addressed. You always got to look at this from the perspective of the spiritual issue that underwrites any worldview. And so, but if we say that economies that are advanced or considered to be developed, they literally just have those fully functioning credit instruments. And so the population, if you're looking at from the severing of, say, traditionalism or any kind of traditional bond that they had that was outside the value extraction kind of machine, well, they're fully developing a marginal self to invest in, say, time turned into a lie, the way how that they see life marginally. They've been sold the vision for life. And so therefore they discount the production process of the consumer through what they do. And so they've ultimately internalized a religious creed. And because they make time is turned into a line, so they're acquitting themselves of a transcendental truth claim. And so they operate in a way where they become marginal, to be manageable, to be quantifiable, to become very predictable, obviously. And the predictability is in reference to the algorithms that are now obviously going to lay claim to your life through predictive analytics. And so therefore the mode of agency is in reference to you being a demand center. So we perfect ourselves as the perfect product to be managed in reference to an end that potentially we don't hold out for ourselves. So the crisis here, so when you're looking at what is the crisis in modernity or in the West particularly, because They are advanced, we could say. They're the ones that have dealt with the spiritual disease the longest. Then you've got the manifest, what you see. So if you're sold not to see what you externalize, or you're sold not to see what you outsource, it becomes harder to sell yourself on that vision. So that standardized kind of aspirational product placement when you're dealing with the manifestation of a hellscape. So you only have to look at, say, the main commercial centres within Western countries to realise that if you go back 50 years and you're looking at, people frame it through low trust society, that these urban centres have been irrecoverably changed. In this way, the disincarnating creed that you play host to, it gets manifest in a way that if you spiritualize time, you create a no place, like I always say. So you've got to think that the no place of the market for your time is a way how that transcendental truth claim becomes individualized. So as an unavowed utopianism that then manifests itself into a collective dystopian future, because you're given as a credit instrument, as a demand center, you've outsourced creativity, because once again, the agency that you can demonstrate is demand. And so as a result of that, you're absolving yourself of responsibility for the care of the place that you live in. All right, because you've outsourced it to parasitism. So it becomes increasingly hard to sell people that lie, that we could say the liberal kind of utopianism, that all people are the same, that all cultures are the same. They're fucking not. That all civilizational domains are the same. They're not. As a result of that, if you're looking at the way how that if you're given as a credit instrument, you're going to reappraise the past in light of your current, say, existential status. And so you can see the return to the land or return to traditions that are beyond, obviously, the hyper-individualism, we would say, which is not. It's not individualist at all. It's a collectivist creed, capitalism is, because it's a command economy. You're commanded to produce yourself as a credit instrument that you're given as. And so therefore, if you don't understand that, then you won't understand that actually the individual, the way how the individual is sold, it's a marginal self, it's an economic agent, as it were. And that economic agent is not a true individual, it's a credit instrument. And so therefore, they're turning back, though, to what would be traditions. So that would look at religious traditions of the West. So you're primarily looking at, say, Christianity or neo-pagan revivals is always about orientating to what was prior to modernity or the globalized no place. And so in this turn, people are going to be reappraising the spiritual plight in reference to what came before, but then you also can sell people through, if there's a hellscape, the retreat is in the no place of the internet, or say online gaming, or basically where they can communicate with each other, but they're not orientated towards place. And so therefore that retreat, we could say, is as a result of the hellscape or the unavowed utopianism turning into the collective dystopian future that people just recognise. And that's because of the spiritual poverty of the worldview that underpins liberalism. I mean, there's no genuine, it's a life of devoid of genuine creation and connection. Because if you eviscerate culture through it being monetized, it's an asset on a balance sheet. If we're beholden to corporatism, obviously corporations do not have a body. So when you're looking at the disincarnating creed obviously comes through the way how time is presupposed to be a value, but then it's the way how it gets manifest or externalized in obviously entities, ultimately entities that don't have a body. That obviously then will make sure that you are maintaining yourself as spectral. So the whole thing is about the way how that this disincarnating creed is ultimately you're responsible for it, but then it can get externalized in what are entities, in that like that kind of underworld, as it were. So obviously you can't sell the buyer's journey, you sell the spiritual aspiration. So people invest in collective movements. The difference when you're looking at, say, collective movements about social justice, it relates to the marginal figure on the periphery of a domain and how no human is illegal. Well, that's the way how people invest in the universalist project of the consumer. So it's interesting that when people frame that there is no such thing as an illegal person, these people disregard the totalizing claim of the imperial form of life or the religious form of life of the consumer. And so ultimately they are sold on liberalism, they're sold on the virtues of it because everybody is just given as a demand centre, an interchangeable economic unit. And of course they would, because if you're say a person in England or in Spain or in Germany or whatever the case may be, and you're just going to import somebody in from another country that has obviously no kind of cultural affinity as far as the civilizational domain of the West, well, of course you can replace one with the other because you're just credit instruments. And so why would a Syrian be any different than a native German in that case when you're just given as interchangeable economic units? And so they're the last gasp, you could say, obviously, of the liberal lie, is the way the way of looking at people as being units. Because if you're looking at mass migration, and then ultimately you're looking at it from the perspective of resource management, so that's in reference to the worldview that transcends obviously borders and boundaries, because you're looking at the imperium as being in reference to the consumer form of life. So at this stage, people are yet to question the production process of the consumer that they're given as, or the demand centre, the interchangeable economic unit. And so if you can acknowledge the hellscape is becoming ever more evident, and yet you get sold on the political, let's say a political solution to it, remigration, let's say, for example, when they're still not dealing with the fact that you're still given as a credit instrument for a political class. So the spiritual question is completely jettisoned or discounted in order for politics to hold sway in that case. Not to say that it doesn't have a function, but if it's not connected to the spiritual question, then you're not addressing the root cause of this issue, which, like I said, has got to do with your unavowed religiosity or your unavowed utopianism, and ultimately the way that you become that credit instrument, which has ultimately got to do with the question of the credit that you use and the way how you become twice born through the use of a credit you are not the originator of. But the issue, so this spiritual kind of crisis reveals for the managers of the paradigm, this issue that they reveals a crisis or something that they have to address. And so if the advanced economy is the one where you've got the fully functioning credit instruments, but now they are becoming dysfunctional, well, then you take what are the populace of emerging economies, or where the consumer is not fully developed, and you import them in. Now, if you're importing them in, you're diluting the potential for change, because then what you're doing, the native people in a country are dealing with the issues associated with the hellscape that creates, because you're importing people that don't have any cultural affinity, don't actually have a line of questioning that is deep in reference to the culture of modernity, because modernity has been imported to these countries and it hasn't sprung from basically the soil of the West. All right, so the people of the West are considerably more savvy when it comes to the issue, all right, and are in a better position to obviously address this thing than any person that's being imported in. So, but what happens through the importation is the dilution of change, because it gets held in reference to the politics and not the spiritual question, as it were. It's not to say that like I said, it cannot obviously touch earth in the context of that, and that's the thing that's yet to occur. Because then what you have is that this is obviously classic imperial stratagem, is that you introduce these people and the issue is just infighting, okay? Rather than the people, the native population, looking at, okay, how do we create a new way of life we're not given as credit instruments? And through doing that, you're holding out what becomes emblematic of a new spirit that other peoples of the West would emulate. And so then what happens, if it occurs within England, say for instance, or different countries, Western countries, then what you're creating is a spiritual renewal of that civilizational domain. Now, that's not shared, that's exclusionary, all right? Because it's in reference to the credit instrument that you're given as, and obviously your heritage that is obviously that animates your actions. So there's no false universalist claim when you're looking at the spiritual question that would drive, say, that renewal. It's not driven by the false universalist claim of the consumer, because you're making redundant the unavowed religiosity. all right, and the way how that you cannot be sold on life, the way how it's given, to discount the fact that you don't presence the indivisibility of the self, or what is the God that is without origination, if you're going to use God as a word here. All right, the God here in this context is not something that has an origin in the sense of the way how that we would understand it, the way how God is this football or this thing that's been passed around. You're looking at, well, what is without origination? And so if you can revive the spirit, and so therefore look at the universe as this absolutely magical thing that you cannot wrap your head around, all right, that is beyond comprehension. The only way that you can do justice to life is to obviously practice a action that is without origination, all right, so animate with what is already within motion, and so therefore not be twice born through the use of a credit you are not the originator of. By looking at advanced and, say, emerging, this gives us a way to frame the way how, say, politics frames the migrant that comes in. So usually you have the striving immigrant is in reference to, obviously, the spiritual poverty of the West as one of decadence or privilege. But this is not the case. This framing of that, say, immigrants come in and they make the most of the opportunity that presented themselves. Well, what's that opportunity? It's literally a buyer's journey. So they are not a fully functioning credit instrument like the native population are, and yet you cannot compare one to the other, and whereby you denigrate, say, the native population for not having a healthy work ethic, when the work ethic is ultimately in reference to your replacement, because the work ethic here is in reference to the worldview. The work ethic is in the way how that you make money. So legitimize a credit you are not the originator of. You legitimize the leveraging the use of that credit allows. Work ethic of an immigrant doesn't question the nature of credit, doesn't question the nature of the totalizing claim of a buyer's journey, because the spiritual poverty, they and their ancestors haven't lived with it. And so the framing of this, the way how it gets contrasted, is that you have this apathetic, privileged, decadent kind of culture, and here you have people that are making the most of the opportunity, and that somehow the ones that are making the most of the opportunity is more evocative. It's more demonstrative of this facile kind of state of the native population. Is a misreading of the issue, because ultimately the flaw, the spiritual question, is obviously jettisoned for people to offer that narrative, and that suits the political narrative. It suits it. This has always basically been done. But when you look at it, when you draw out from that, well, what's the opportunity that immigrants are making good on? It's literally just a buyer's journey. They see the world, the place that they come. They have no affinity to the place that they go other than the buyer's journey that's been set for their aspirations, because the shithole that they came from didn't allow for that. But why? Because you could say that the economy is not advanced. It's not advanced in producing them as a credit instrument that they're given as. So therefore they're investing in the credit instrument that they're given as. Obviously politics allows for that, because if you're importing these people in and you can leverage their vote to maintain this system of replacement, well, that achieves the end, because any change is then contained within politics and not obviously addressing a spiritual question which is beyond politics, then becomes civilizational, it becomes a Western thing. And if you think that the West has got to do with imperialism, and if it is, it's to do with the form of life of the consumer. Because then once people understand that, then the people of the West will have an affinity with, say native populations, so that's Aboriginals within, say, Australia. That will be obviously, any of the native peoples within anywhere where Europeans have gone, where there's still, say, traditional people. All right, there'll be this affinity with them in a way, because these people obviously know what they've been dealing with for like hundreds of years with colonization. Just as now you've got the Europeans that are dealing with colonization, but what's the colonization that they share? It's the spiritual disease. When you spiritualize time, and the way how that you cannot do justice to your first birth, or the way how you cannot do justice to your ancestors through being twice born through the use of credit you are not the originator. How can you do justice to the earth and touch place if you're beholden to an unavowed, say, utopianism, or the no place of the market for your time? How can you temporalize that? So if you can read what's occurring within the West and connect it to, say, indigenous peoples and what would be a new dreaming. This is the way a new spiritual renewal that would obviously be one within Western civilization, so the native populations of the West, but then also of indigenous peoples. Then you're looking at something that actually transcends politics because it becomes a spiritual issue. So in that way, we can say that, well, the great replacement, so however way you want to think, is just a product cycle. If you're given as a credit instrument and you're a resource, you're a human resource, you are going to be managed in reference to the end that parasites set out for you. What's that? That's just to maintain them. So to maintain managerialism is in reference to the excluded middle, or what you absent when you practice existential arbitrage or the Faustian pact. You have to realize that. That's the principal trade. So if you're looking at the difference between an advanced economy and what is emerging, acknowledging that there's one trade, and that you could say the degree of difference is in reference to the absencing of creativity, or the connection to obviously what is without origination, or to the earth, or to that tradition that is beyond, say, the monetization of goodwill, or the monetization of the memory of your ancestors ultimately, or the way how that you become a hungry ghost and you cannot be sated.